Hello, everybody. I am here, Diane Covington, to share with you chapters 7, 8, and 9. We have a lot to cover. This is Mary Kay's book on people management. As you know, it's required reading it like the FBI Management Academy and several business schools. So, chapter 7, because we have so much to cover, I'm going to go quick. Chapter 7 is called Be a Follow Through Person. And Mary Kay's quote says, Be the kind of person who can always be counted on to do what you say you'll do. So, be a follow through person was super important. Mary Kay says ideas are a dime a dozen, but the men and women who implement them are priceless, right? So she talks a lot about nothing great is ever accomplished without follow through. It is important to listen, but then what you do with all that information or how you act upon it is important. Okay. So Mary Kay says that at any level within the sales force, they follow a very set procedure. One is listen. Number two, involve others in helping formulate a solution. And number three, follow through. Okay. So Mary Kay, the company used to have a program called We Hear You, or We Heard You. And it would be taking a target, like a focus group, talking about the problem, trying to figure out, different options, different things. And then they would go back because they knew working with a smaller group was more effective than working with masses. And then they would go back to that group and say, this is kind of what we planned. It's kind of like shoot holes in it, give us your input. She says, we felt it would be more expedient to work with an advisory committee rather than a large group. We'd sit down with them and say, here's what we think about the challenges you're facing, and we want to know what you think. So there's that reciprocating feedback. It says people will support that which they help to create. So think about that. The same thing as with your hostess and everything else is that which they're a part of creating, they will back up, right? When you dictate even the most thoughtful and logical concept to a person, this idea is still a command. When you ask her to contribute to its inception, that very same idea becomes a personal crusade. She suddenly feels a responsibility to ensure its success. They like some of our ideas, but certainly not all of them. So Mary Kay had an advisory committee, and the advisory committee expressed some grievances or issues of things they wanted to have happen in Mary Kay. And so corporate came back with all these solutions, and they said that some of the nationals liked some of them, but not all of them. And then they went back and they just did this back and forth. Every 6 months, they would sit down with this panel, and they found that at the end, they found very little resistance in the new programs because they had adjusted it based on the feedback of the sales directors, the sales force, and the nationals. Mary Kay says during each conference, when they got this panel together, they experienced very little resistance because they had done three things. The original idea had come from the grassroots of the organization. So if you're in management or whatever, it's getting their feedback, the people that are out in the field. Number two, they'd done their homework by carefully thinking through all phases of the solution. And three, they had involved a target group. In our company would be a national sales director, and gotten their support and their feedback. So then she goes on to talk about the best kind of follow through is immediate. Now, this is super important. So they talked about how there was an organization, it was an automobile sales organization, and all the salespeople were really upset. They felt that their commissions were not fair. They gave a lot of feedback, and the manager sat down with them, heard all their complaints, and said, we will implement this immediately. And they came up with this. Well, now all the people in the dealership and the sales manager, they all felt like, wow, they heard me. This is going to be great. So one Sunday afternoon, they all met for 4 hours at the boss's house to review their problems. The sales manager listened attentively. They talked to the upper people. We got a lot of hours in that day, but they all went home happy because they felt they had finally gotten through to the management, and the fact that their problems were very real. They thought the meeting had been a huge success. However, they listened magnificently, but that's all they did. They never followed through on a single thing. Weeks and then months went by. At that point, several of the salespeople had quit. They said, this is a bad time to, they would kept putting them off and saying, oh, this is a bad time to discuss it, or we'll deal with it next quarter, or we're going to get to it. They said it was very demoralizing. And then this man told Mary Kay, this auto salesperson says, as bad as morale had been, it got even worse, Mary Kay. 3 months after our meeting, four of our salesmen had quit, and sales totaled by those four that had remained had dropped considerably. So the changes weren't appreciated because the length of time required to implement them and the goodness that could have been gained by immediate follow through. Trust is an important element of follow through. Write that down. And so, there's nothing more frustrating than sitting down with a group of people and brainstorming, and then you say, these are amazing ideas, let's implement them. And then literally 6 months later, nothing's happened. She also says, never make a promise you can't keep. A manager should never make a promise that something will be done unless he or she is absolutely certain that it will be done. A broken promise is devastating for those who have been disappointed. A manager should never make a commitment unless he has the complete authority to do so. So if everything has to be approved by somebody above you, then say, I will go to bat for you, I will do this, I will represent you, I will make this happen. But you may not be the person who's actually able to make that decision. She also talks about follow through requires discipline and planning. And what's interesting is there are many tasks that all of us are required to do, but prefer to avoid. Writing letters is an example, right? And so this is a great story. I have to share this with you. This it reminds me of a story I heard about Ivy Lee, a renowned efficiency expert who called on Charles Schwab, former president of Bethlehem Steel. And he said, quote, if I could increase your people's efficiency and your sales by spending just 15 minutes with each of your executives, would you hire me to do the job? He says, well, how much is it going to cost me? He says, nothing unless it works. In 3 months, you can decide and send me a check for whatever you feel it's worth. The industrialist nodded his head in agreement. Well, then Lee proceeded to conduct individual meetings with all the Bethlehem Steel executives. Each person asked them to make a promise for the next 90 days, and I'm going to ask you to do the same. For the next 90 days, before leaving your office at the end of the day, the executive was instructed to make a list of six, not 60, six most important things he had to do the next day and remember and number them in order of their importance because sometimes they don't come out in your brain in order. So you might just put them all on paper and then number them. What is the most important one? What's the second most important? And then he says if something wasn't done on the list, it was added to the following day's list. At the end of the 90-day period, the increase in efficiency in sales had pleased Schwab so much, he wrote Lee a check for $35,000. You guys, this is way back, way, 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 way back. This $35,000, that is a ton of money. Lee had taught them follow through, and that was quality for which Schwab was willing to pay a lot of money. He was impressed by the story's message that had ever since. Mary Kay actually gives us this. Well, we don't have it anymore, but it's the six most important thing list. So don't trust it to memory. Mary Kay used to say the faintest ink is better than most attentive memory. If you don't write it down, you'll never get around to doing it. I've got to go quick on this. So with no phone calls or other interruptions in the early mornings, Mary Kay started a thing called the 5 o'clock club because she was thinking, how am I going to get more done? Because she's constantly interrupted throughout the day. And she thought, well, that time from like 5:30 to 8 is like gold because the phone's not going to ring. Who's going to call you at 5 o'clock in the morning? So she started a thing called the 5 o'clock club, and she would get up at 5 o'clock and be in her office at 6. And she would get so much done. So she said, when she asked her sales force, who wants to do the 5 o'clock club with me? Everyone raised their hands. And then she says, well, on some of those mornings, I'm actually going to call you at 5:30 and I'm going to ask you what's on your six most important things to do list. How many of you still want to do it? And almost everybody still raised their hand. So I thought that was super cute. She talks about the importance of follow through. I'm not going to get into all this, but she said success is in our business depends on customer satisfaction. A one-time order is not what we're after. Every beauty consultant is taught to give outstanding service, which is by far the best way to ensure repeat business. She said, after all my years of experience in selling, I would conclude that servicing the customer is the common denominator shared by all great salespeople and sales managers. You know, if you buy something at Sephora, Ulta, or a store, they're not going to call you in 2 days, 2 weeks, and 2 months. Guarantee it. Offer you a gift on your birthday. You know, all of those things that we do, especially that 2 day call is key. So then Mary Kay talks about do your homework. The chapter contains several examples of following through with projects. Do our homework, whether following through with a major change within a company, which it's responding to, or whether following through on a single customer preference for a lip color or whatever, it all needs to be done. Then she talked about how important it is to go to your weekly unit meeting. Okay. She said, our weekly unit meeting, if you had a bad week, you need the meeting. If you had a great week, the meeting needs you. And when a beauty consultant leaves a sales meeting full of enthusiasm, she has an entire week to let that enthusiasm work for her. It's important for all salespeople to know their businesses thoroughly. We feel particularly strong about this point because beauty consultants conduct skincare classes. As instructors, they've added responsibility over and above the average salesperson to be an expert in each area. So what I will share with you guys is she has a sentence on here. It says, Somebody might say, well, what's the pH factor of this cleanser? And you're thinking, I don't know that. And so you can say, nobody's ever asked me that before, but I'll find out and I'll get back to you with the answer right away. And you can call our medical staff, you can call your sales director, because you want to help a customer know what is the best product for them. And a great thing now, being that we're technology, we have charts that will show things like what is the best eye cream and the different factors. The next thing Mary Kay talks about, we're still in the first chapter, says, as people manage you to have a constant selling job. Although you might not sell an actual product or service, you must sell your ideas in order to gain the support of others with whom you work. So we're all in that mode. She said there's a great deal of truth in the adage, if you want something done, give it to a busy person. Somehow they always seem to have the capacity to take on one more project. And then Mary Kay says, over the years, I've observed that those who are blessed with the most talent don't necessarily outperform everyone else. It's the people with follow through who excel. This is true in all walks of life, business, sports, and the arts. All right, now let's go to the chapter on enthusiasm. One of my favorites, Mary Kay's quote, decide today that when anyone comes to you with a negative thought, you're going to replace it with a positive one. And then she says, nothing great is ever achieved without enthusiasm. She talked about how important it is, and like they used to sing the Mary Kay enthusiasm song, but it created esprit de corps. So even if you think some of that singing stuff is silly, singing sometimes can actually help people out of depression and all kinds of things. She talked about a good leader arouses enthusiasm. And she talked about how nobody can be up all the time. And contrary to what you believe, um, sorry, I just lost my place. And contrary to what many people may think about Mary Kay, I'm not always up either. I just don't let anyone know when I'm not up. Early in my sales career, after a year after my divorce with my husband, I had considered myself a failure as a woman, as a wife, and as a person. My marriage had failed. My poor emotional state had caused physical symptoms that several doctors had diagnosed as rheumatoid arthritis. One specialist said my condition was progressing so rapidly that in a matter of months, I'd be hopelessly disabled. With 3 young kids to support, that was a horrendous thought. At the time, I was working for a company that sold home products through a party plan. My livelihood depended on giving 3 parties a day, 3 demonstrations a day, averaging $25 to $40 each. If I were to survive with my 3 kids, I had to leave my personal problems at home. So I was determined to always go in there with a smile, no matter how I felt. In retrospect, I think my physical symptoms were induced by extreme emotional stress because the more successful I was in selling, the more my health improved. At first, the doctors were skeptical, insisting that my improved health was simply a case of remission and that the arthritis would eventually disable me. But as my sales continued to increase, so did my health, and I never had any symptoms of arthritis again. Like everyone else, I still have days when I don't feel like working. That's when I have to struggle a bit to muster up my usual enthusiasm. And this is Mary Kay's quote. A very successful man once told me, Mary Kay, if I only went to work on the days I felt like it, I'd never go to work. I'm certain that if we were honest, we'd all admit to having those days when we simply have to go give ourselves a little pep talk, which is really, we all do that, right? She says, as a manager, you'll have days when you're frustrated or depressed and still need to inspire others. Everybody has those days. And when you're not feeling up to par, you simply have got to work harder because your attitude can infect the enthusiasm of your people. She says, I recall many instances when I had been exasperated and still I had to put my best foot forward. And she said, especially when she had her interview with 60 Minutes, that was a real pivotal point in our company. Mel was helping Mary Kay touch up chip paint on a baseboard, and the entire pint of paint spilled in the middle of the living room carpet. And it was on a holiday, so Mary Kay knew that no stores were going to open. So she said to Mel, go and find me paint thinner. And he came back 15 minutes later with paint thinner. They just saturated the carpet, if you can imagine the smell, cleaned up all the paint. And as the cameraman is like right over the spot where the stain was. He kept sniffing and smelling. So Mary Kay just said how she just was determined for that interview to go well. It's interesting to note that the word enthusiasm comes from a Greek origin meaning God within. Similarly, enthusiasm must begin within you. When you are consumed with enthusiasm, those around you cannot help but respond in kind. And do go back and read all those stories about the Mary Kay's interview with 60 Minutes and everything. It's very fascinating. Our last chapter for today is called The Speed of the Leaders, the Speed of the Gang. And Mary Kay's quote says, how you live your life, the image you project, and the example you set speak so loudly that if it's not in harmony with what you are telling people, what you're saying will never be believed. So it's in other words, if you're saying one thing out of your mouth, but you're not living that or portraying that, no one's going to believe you. So in talking about the speed of the leaders, the speed of the gang, she talks a lot about directors working. They work the way that she's taught them, consistently encouraging people to strive for excellence in all facets of their business. She'll talk about how it's important that we stay informed on the entire cosmetic industry as best as we can, right? Master the product line, recognize the value of good personal grooming. I mean, you've got to look like a beauty consultant, right? And I'm not saying you've got to look like Vogue magazine 24/7. I don't go to the park or go out for a power walk dressed in a suit looking impeccable. I will always be cute from the waist up. Always I'll have a sharp looking blouse on or some cute top. I will always have my makeup and my hair looking professional. I don't want someone to ever say to me, you work for Mary Kay, like you're a beauty consultant, with that type of a tone, like, really? So, right? So we want to be the part. Mary Kay talks about leading by example. She said it is unduly complicated. It's simply a matter of doing your homework. She says, I'm sure it's the same in our company as in others. Nothing takes the place of a good working leader. Unfortunately, many people who work hard to be promoted to a leadership position develop acute executivitis once they're promoted, meaning they remove themselves from the field. And that's the one thing I've respected the most out of Mary Kay Cosmetics is that to become a director, you can't just join the company and become a director. You have to start as a consultant and work your way up. What's more, once they've stopped working their business, they're no longer inspiring their unit members to do so. So enthusiasm is stronger when you've just done what you are to teach. So they talked about people frequently mimic a leader's work habits and self-discipline for better or worse. If she habitually comes to work late, takes long lunch hours, makes long personal phone calls, has constant coffee breaks, and watches the clock all day, the people will do the same. Fortunately, workers also copy good habits. So if they know you're wearing the product, they know that you are taking good care of customers. I literally yesterday got a customer who reached out to a mutual friend and said, who is your Mary Kay girl? Because I've left two messages for this other one and she's never called me back. So by the time I called this woman named Michelle, she said, I said, well, tell me what's going on. She goes, I've used Mary Kay off and on for 20 years. I offered the opportunity with her. She wasn't interested. She said, I'd rather pay retail, whatever. And I said, so I don't want to step on anyone's toes. She says, I've left two messages for this consultant with a list of the products I need, and I haven't heard from her, and it's been a week, and I'm desperate. I said, I apologize. That is not how our company wants us to do customer service, and I will take great care of you. So I shipped everything because she lives 45 minutes from me. I shipped her everything, did not charge her for shipping, and she is thrilled for that kind of customer service. So it's super important, you guys. So Mary Kay talks in this chapter about operate from experience. It says a good leader operates not on theory, but on experience. Simple directives must go unheeded unless you can back them up with ample proof that what you're asking others to do can be done. All right. So Mary Kay went on and decided to do this thing called 10 beauty shows in a week. And I'll never forget this. She went out on stage and said that she challenged us to do 10 parties in a week, 2 a day for 5 days, right? And then Mary Kay's corporate staff got their heads together and they're going, could you imagine if the chairman of the board did it? Like everybody would say, if Mary Kay can do it, I can do it. So they bounced the idea off of Mary Kay. And at first she was like, what? She hadn't held a party in 10 years. And she says, besides, I don't know people outside of the family and they're all wearing Mary Kay or they're in Mary Kay, right? And so she decided she was going to do it. So she sat around the boardroom while they proposed this idea. And she turned to the gentleman to her right and she said, you're a relatively new employee. Has your wife ever hosted a beauty show? And he goes, I don't think so. She goes, great. Tell her I'll be calling her this afternoon. So Mary Kay literally went out and held 10 parties. She then placed, before she did it, she placed a $4,000 wholesale order. She wanted everything on hand because she knew she'd sell more if she had it on hand. She said, I practiced for hours, drilling myself on the details of every item. I read the latest literature. I reread the educational manuals that had been written long ago. She said she began her first party on Monday. By the week's end, she'd held 10 shows, booked 19 parties from those 10 shows for future, which she said she turned over to someone else. She sold over $2,500 and added two people to her team. She said, I'm sure there's not a sales manager around who hasn't heard things are different now. They'll say things like, oh, things are different now, Mary Kay. Things aren't like they were then. That's probably the biggest and oldest cop out on record. I'm sure the world's first sales manager heard this from the world's first salesperson. But I will tell you, yes, things are different. We have social media, we have technology, we can CDS an order. But you know what? The bottom line is it's taking care of customers and remembering everyone's got a sign around their neck that says, make me feel important. So, just last but not least, Mary Kay talks about showing works better than telling. She says, as you can imagine, as a leader is based upon many complex factors. Let me start over. I'm sorry. And so your image as a leader is based upon many complex factors. Your knowledge of the company's product, your personal credibility, and sense of self-respect, your sound work habits, and your willingness to demonstrate a thorough understanding of others' needs. And then Mary Kate's going to mention one last thing. This is a pet peeve of hers. A pet peeve is when the leader who doesn't use his or her own product. She goes, I've seen Cadillac dealerships where the sales staff is driving Mercedes, life insurance managers who are uninsured. Not only is this poor public relations, but it's also a most negative impact on company employees. I believe that a leader should use his or her company's products and do so with pride. So that's it. So I just thought these were such amazing chapters. And this last thing says there's a great deal of responsibility involved with being a leader. And the higher your position, the more attention you must devote to projecting an appropriate image. You're always in the spotlight and you must act accordingly. Lead by example, and soon your people will do as you do. All the people at Mary Kay and the independent sales force believe the speed of the leader is the speed of the gang. Thanks, you guys, for listening to this chapter. And we'll do 3 chapters next week. See you then.